welcome everyone to today's Synergist webinar, Unlocking the Value of Ergonomics with Big Data. I'm Ed Rutkowski, Editor-in-Chief of the Synergist, the magazine of the American Industrial Hygiene Association. I'd like to thank all of our attendees for participating, and especially HumanTech for sponsoring today's webinar. Our first speaker today is Jeff Sanford. Jeff is Director of Consulting and Ergonomics Engineer for HumanTech. He leads a team of ergonomists to develop, manage, and sustain global ergonomics programs using software solutions for Fortune 1000 clients across a broad spectrum of industries. Prior to joining HumanTech, Jeff worked as a divisional ergonomics engineer within the Seating Systems division of Lear Corporation. He received a Bachelor's and Master's of Human Kinetics degrees and a Bachelor of Education degree from the University of Windsor in Windsor, Ontario. Jeff is also a certified professional ergonomist. Our second speaker is Jenny Dustin, Managing Consultant and Ergonomics Engineer for HumanTech. Jenny oversees large-scale ergonomics initiatives in the manufacturing, aerospace, and automotive industries and helps organizations build internal ergonomics expertise using software solutions. Jenny's clients include Parker Hannifin, Tempur Sealy International, and Hunter Douglas. Jenny received a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in occupational environmental health, specializing in ergonomics, from Colorado State University. She is a certified professional ergonomist and a certified safety professional. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Jeff.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks everyone for your time today. Jenny and I are going to walk you through a presentation that's called Unlocking the Value of Ergonomics with Big Data, and we're going to rely on a couple of different things. One, we've done a lot of research recently, so we're going to point you towards some research articles that really help to identify the value of ergonomics. And being lifelong ergonomists, we're going to rely on our expertise and our experiences that we've gone through over the last, 20 years, okay? For those that don't know HumanTech, we are a consulting, training, and software company that's been in business for 40 years. So we can certainly rely on our experience. And we are a brand under the extremely successful Velocity EHS umbrella. So to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about today, we've bullet pointed some learning outcomes. So in showing up today, you're hopefully going to learn aspects of each of these. So we're going to show you the value that ergonomics can bring to an organization. We're going to show you how smarter solutions will help improve your employees' performance and well-being. The potential benefits of big data. So big data is quite a buzzy word these days, and we'll show you the big data that we have and how it can be used within ergonomics. And then lastly, we have a lot of data that will show both market and industry trends with regards to ergonomics. So just a reminder, and we do this a lot, even still today, we want to set the stage to make sure everybody understands what ergonomics truly is. And it is about changing the workplace to optimize human performance. For years, we've been confused with companies that do stretching, heaven forbid, sell office furniture. So really, we need to establish what the definition of ergonomics is still to this day. And really what it is, go to the last half of this sentence here. It's a system and a profession that applies theory and principles, and of course the data that we've been talking about so far, as well as methods to design a workplace that optimizes human performance. And that will ultimately lead to the overall system performance as well. Okay, so if you take a look at this graph that we have here, again, pulled from a research article that shows flexion strength versus elbow angle. And really, it helps us define what the problem is in this workstation. So, at first glance, you're going to say, oh, geez, he's reaching too far, right? But we can use data to say, as we extend our elbow, so it comes to 180 degrees, our ability to exert strength goes down, so flexion strength. And that's what this graph is showing us. So we use data like this to help optimize human performance. We're just not saying, hey, this looks bad. Let's fix it. So we use this data to optimize the workstation around this employee. And ultimately, it helps us define whether this is part of the problem or not. And to really focus on the issues, we are really talking about musculoskeletal disorders. The number one call we get these days, without a doubt, are from companies that say, we've been working really hard on our classic safety issues. So slips, trips, and falls, lacerations, burns, that sort of thing. Those have all essentially gone away. It's these musculoskeletal soft tissue injuries that are still there, and we don't have a method to manage it. Okay, so when we're talking about ergonomics, we're really talking about those soft tissue musculoskeletal disorders. And ultimately, you need a full management system to help reduce those risks within the workplace. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here are the elements of a systematic approach to manage risk with regards to ergonomics.
So I'm going to take over from Jeff for just a few minutes to talk about some of the benefactors and the benefits when we talk about an ergonomics process. And really, with all of these things that we're talking about, it's based in research and, again, is leveraging data to make sure that we understand these outcomes. And traditionally, when people have thought about implementing an ergonomics process at their facility or across their corporation, it's really been, like as Jeff alluded to, either as a result of incidents where they have high maybe injury or incident rate that they're trying to get down, or maybe it's surrounding employee well-being and keeping our employees happy in the workplace. Maybe in some cases for some companies it's been more about reducing turnover or reducing absenteeism. The tricky thing about some of those methods is that they can be hard to measure. And where we're seeing more and more companies go is towards looking at things that impact and how the ergonomics process impacts the actual business performance. So instead of trying to measure, hey, we didn't have any injuries last year, is that a result of our ergonomics process, or is that we were just lucky? Now we're starting to see companies shift towards this idea of, listen, we implemented this ergonomics process, and it's helped us with our sustainability. It's helped us with quality, with productivity. And again, we're hearing about this just based on client comments and just talking to people that are actually out on the shop floor. But it's also based in research. So we're starting to actually see the research catch up and show these other benefits and impacts that are positive as a result of an ergonomics process.
I really like this research article, Jenny, because for years, we have to admit that safety and ergonomics is not a revenue-generating entity. So we were always about cost avoidance. This new data, in terms of business performance, allows us to speak the language of the C-suite to understand that there is business performance gains when you do a world-class ergonomics process the right way.
Absolutely. So thinking about some of the costs, I suppose, of poor ergonomics. So again, let's think about how we've kind of approached things in the past, where we know that these musculoskeletal disorders are expensive. And again, the data is supporting this. This is from the OSHA Safety Pays program, where the average direct medical costs of an upper extremity injury or musculoskeletal disorder is between $29,000 and $33,000, and low back or back injury is between $22,500 and $76,000. Now, the tricky thing about this, and we've heard this before, is that these are the direct costs. We know the indirect costs can also be very significant. So, OSHA has said that it's for every you're looking at basically 1.1 ratio of every dollar spent in direct costs. You would also expect to experience that in indirect costs. And so these things are very, very expensive simply because of they're difficult to diagnose. They can be hard to treat. They tend to last a long time. So they are very expensive. Interestingly, though, this is the leading causes of our workplace injuries are a result of these overexertion. So when we're talking about this, we're looking at things like lifting and lowering and pushing and pulling and carrying. These overexertion injuries are the top non-fatal injury in the workplace. And it's 23, you'll see on the far left side of this graph here, it's about 23% of the workplace injuries experienced in the US, which is a huge amount. And it's interesting because a lot of the times when people think about ergonomics, they think of repetitive motion injuries. And if you look at where repetitive motion injuries are on this graph, you'll notice they're on the far right side of this. And sometimes we hear about that or think about that in the office environment. And while important, we're missing kind of this big elephant in the room where it's actually these overexertion injuries that are, so prevalent in industry. And the other thing that I would say about this is not only are they a high number, but they're very expensive. So you'll notice there, $13.79 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars spent on these injuries every year. So again, they're very, very expensive.
This is a huge paradigm shift too, just in the field of ergonomics, because we have been typecast as the repetitive motion group, right? Because if you think of just the classification of injuries, repetitive strain, repetitive motion injuries, and those are your ergonomic injuries, there's a huge miss there in terms of overexertion. So, if there's one thing, we'd like you to take away many things from this, but think of now the overexertion as being that number one cause in association with ergonomics.
Absolutely. And not only is it that it's the number one cause in 2017, that, recent data available, but it's actually been going on for at least the past decade. And these numbers really, you'll see, haven't changed over the past decade. And they're hovering right around that 25% mark over the past 10 years, the percentage of injuries caused by that overexertion. So again, we're, based on what the data is telling us, we're still missing opportunities to reduce this, these high numbers of these injuries. And this is probably not a surprise to anybody. So the injuries are there. We can see that they haven't gone down in the past 10 years, but guess what? They are starting to become more expensive. So not only has the cost of these injuries kind of topped off, but it's actually started to rise. And it's probably not a surprise to anybody that healthcare costs are expensive and not getting any cheaper. So again, high incidence isn't changing, and high cost is not changing over the past 10 years as well. And again, this is all based on the data that we have available. So kind of taking a bit of a step back and thinking about, okay, so why should we care? Now, the obvious reason that we care is, of course, we want our employees always to go home happy and healthy at the end of the day. We know that. We know that these things are the right things to do. When we look at studies that have investigated implementing a single site ergonomics process, we find that having an ergonomics process is in fact effective at doing that. And so this was a study that was looking at employees in a textile plant in southern Ontario. And what they saw is that they saw a decrease in these first aid cases, they saw decreases in long-term sicknesses, in modified duty cases, all of these things that you'll see. So again, it's not only a decrease, what I found was interesting, it's not only an increase in the incidence of these things occurring, but it's also an increase in the severity of the things that they were seeing, which you can kind of see with that long-term sickness absence going down. And so again, doing this at a site level, clearly there's some market benefits with this. And again, this is based on research. So,
if I could put some real life to this, Jenny, I was working with a client recently that is in an area that has really low unemployment. So they have difficulty finding employees. They actually use their well-designed workplace as a recruiting tool because they're having troubles recruiting people and retention. Right, so in a spot where unemployment is low, do you want to work somewhere that's going to break your back, or somewhere that's well designed in terms of your physical nature? So this is I thought it was an interesting spin on ergonomics.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good point that there are. Again, these companies that are just trying to get people in the door. I was at a site not too long ago that they were a site of 80 people, so a smaller site, but they were down a head count of 16 people that they just couldn't keep fully staffed. And again, it's one of those things that definitely has a big impact. So thinking about this from, again, the health and wellness standpoint, yes, there's very, very clear benefits, but also thinking about this as a cost benefit, what they found was when they implemented this ergonomics process, It took them, they looked at this over 2 years, and they started with this process. It cost them about $36,000, but the benefit that they found was about $350,000. So that's your cost-benefit ratio there is about 5 times. And again, I think that this is one of those numbers that if you took this to site leadership, they'd go, oh my gosh, where do I sign? How do I make this happen straight away? So very clear benefits that are, and again, and we'll illustrate this throughout the conversation, but this is all based in research, not just us telling you this. So if we zoom out just a little bit, now we're talking about, okay, so we did this at a single site and we saw great results. But what if I start thinking about doing this at multiple sites? And that's what this study looked at. This was at 3M, and they looked at implementing a participatory ergonomics process within their site. So they had ergonomics teams, and they went out and did assessments and implemented improvements and came up with all these great ideas on how to make the workplace better. And they did this across all of their U.S. sites, and across all of these sites, they found these fantastic benefits. So again, 70% reduction in these ergonomics recordable injuries, 50% reduction in lost time cases. You can see all of these benefits, and this graph on the right, I think this is the graph that we would hope that the Liberty Mutual graph would show, right? We would love to see as a nation that, you know, these numbers would go down, because this is, again, over the course of, 10 years, not quite 10 years, some very clear benefits of rolling it out across multiple sites. This was another study that was looking at, I believe this was at an automotive facility, and what they found was that looking at just individual improvements, so thinking about one improvement, what is the benefit that I can see out of that individual improvement? And what they saw was that there was, for each improvement that they implemented, they realized a 7% relative risk reduction, which if you think about that in person years, that's about a reduction of 5 injuries per 100 person years. So again, if we're looking at this purely from the risk management standpoint and injury reduction, we can see that, again, something even as simple as a single improvement can have a very real impact.
This speaks loudly to a risk management approach. You know, like we talked about it at the get-go, and we're going to talk about it throughout, is the concept of risk management versus, you know, injury management. And these numbers speak very loudly to rolling out a risk management approach.
Absolutely. So now taking it to, a global approach, so a macro corporate initiative. This was 3M, again, after the success of their starting small and then growing across U.S. sites, they decided to launch their ergonomics process globally. And they saw these fantastic benefits where, again, 73% high-risk job exposures were eliminated. And they took this with the engineering and administrative controls approach, so thinking about the hierarchy of controls. Again, saw a 55% reduction in their case incident rate, and a 40% overall reduction in their lost time case incident rate, all of these great things. And one of the interesting things that they found was that a lot of the solutions that they ended up implementing were fairly straightforward and were identified as part of their ergonomics team. So, you know, when we're talking about some of these things, and we'll talk a little bit about this more later, it doesn't necessarily always have to be, we're completely redesigning the facility. Sometimes it can be those just simple improvements identified by the teams. And then finally, this one's a bit more close to home. This is one of our clients, and they launched a macro corporate initiative across all of their global sites, and they did this in 2013. And they saw, again, this is the graph that we hope that Liberty Mutual table would look like, because again, a drastic reduction in their incident rate. And Jeff, I understand they recently presented this data at a large national conference.
Yeah, so this is our client Cummins data, and you can see over time, this is what every ergonomist wants to see, is the drop in incident rate. But if you look closely, you can see the variance by quarter. So you can see, they call it the quarterly ergonomic incident rate. You can see that the variance decreases not only the incidence but the variance. So not only are we seeing the impact from an injury perspective, but it's way more consistent. So you don't have the massive up and downs that you can't describe and define. What they really appreciated about this was the fact that there is very limited variance with a strong approach.
So these are, again, this is talking the language of the health and safety folks. So this is why health and safety should really care. But we all know that, again, sometimes there's other people that other ears that we need to get involved, right? And so thinking about other ways that we can present this information of, okay, well, that's great from the health and safety perspective, but maybe at this site we don't have a problem with these incidents. So why should we care from an operations standpoint? So this was back to that study of the textile plant in southern Ontario, and what they did here was they actually showed the manufacturing performance as they implemented these improvements, as they, again, rolled out this ergonomics process. And they saw a 1% increase in first-time quality production. So now we've got our quality engineers, their ears have perked right up. And a 1% increase at first blush, this doesn't seem like much. But if you think about that, as you're, again, looking at the bigger picture, that's actually quite a drastic increase. And I think any quality engineer would be quite happy to have a 1% increase in their quality. And then they also saw a 5% increase in productivity efficiency. So again, thinking about, now we're talking about maybe our production engineers, our plant managers, they would be very, very excited if they could make some minor improvements and see that 5% increase in productivity. So very real impact, not only from the health and safety perspective, but actual business impacts that affect things like the bottom line and can be tracked in a spreadsheet in accounting is very good data to have. And some of this, it kind of makes sense logically if we sit down and think about it. This was looking at more from a quality, really focusing on that quality perspective. And there is, these two studies here showed a very direct correlation between the risk level of the operation and the number of quality errors or the quality failure rates for the actual process. And not only that, so as you can see here, as the task is more has a higher risk level, it becomes more difficult to do it correctly every single time. And that kind of makes sense, that as your body fatigues, or maybe you can't quite reach something properly or exert that same amount of force at 8 o'clock in the morning as you can at 5 o'clock in the afternoon as your body gets tired. These are the types of numbers that keep our quality engineers awake at night. This is, you always hear about clearly that was built at 5 o'clock on a Friday. These are the things that we really, really try hard to avoid. It should never matter when that when that part was assembled. It should be exactly the same every time. And the other interesting thing is that not only do your rates go up, but the cost goes up to correct those errors. So again, as it becomes more physically demanding, it's going to cost more down the line to repair that part or fix that problem.
One of the things I always tell people too is, if you have the time, and I know you have the data, I tell them to overlay the workstations that are causing their injuries over top of their quality issues, over top of their bottlenecks in their system, and I can almost guarantee you that there's going to be a correlation there.
I completely agree, and I've seen it happen time and time again. That absolutely there's always a correlation there. So just a couple of keys to success when we're talking about ergonomics. So we talk about this just big picture. So yes, we want to have participatory ergonomics programs. Yes, we want it to be proactive. And again, as Jeff alluded to, we want it to be risk-based as opposed to, or risk reduction-based as opposed to injury reductions. We want to actually make physical changes to the workplace. That's something that's really, really important to us as ergonomists. But how do we do that? How do we know where to start? How do we know, is this working? Is it effective? And that's really now where we start to get into leveraging this data and there's so much technology out there and so many things available to us to help us do these things and help us to be successful in these key things. So based on that, I am now going to pass things over to Jeff, and he is going to talk about big data.
So what's pretty awesome about this first section is really we're trying to push that ergonomics has a value within an organization. value to bring injuries down, but also to help with quality and productivity. I hope that's what you got out of that. And it wasn't Jenny and I telling you that human tech can do this 100% and we're the best. It is using research and data to guide you towards that finding. We're going to do the same thing with big data. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of big data. Like I said, it's very buzzy. We've jumped into this because we have a ton of data. And we want to be able to convey messages and pull out trends that you know, our data shows. I mean, obviously we can't show our client data, but as we get into this, you'll be able to see the data points that we can use to show value within an organization. So, you know, interestingly, we got to look into what big data means, and one of the things that we found is that there's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created each day. So, you know, most of it's pictures and video, and most importantly, I had to figure out what quintillion was. And for those that don't know, 1 quintillion is 1,000 trillions. Okay, so it's a lot. But as you know, you carry on your phone, your computer, and just the massive amount of data that gets generated each day. So there's a lot out there. Now, what you do with that data is very important. That was my pause to let you read the comment, because I'm not going to read it to you. But yeah, it's a matter of taking this data now and using it in a functional manner. Okay, so what we're going to show you here now is a concept called the 4 V's of big data. Okay, so there's 4 elements of big data, with the first one being the volume. So the volume of data, how much data do you need? And you can see that 90% of today's data has been created in the last 2 years alone. So you have to have a minimum amount, and you don't want to have too much. So what's the right amount? You also have to have variety. So what type of information do you want to collect? And as you can see in terms of growth, 80% of it is video, images, and documents. So think about that. What variety of data do you need to do your job accurately? Velocity, how quickly do you need that data, right? So, you know, we all the time talk here with our marketing group. Do we send out an email with script, or do we send out a video? What we find is that people are more interested in a 10 to 20 second video because it's quicker. Okay, so the speed and velocity of data is extremely important as well. And then lastly is the veracity, or the quality of the data that you get and that you use. And the bullet point here I thought was extremely interesting, in that 1 in 3 business leaders just don't trust the information they use for decisions. Okay, and you know, there's a data point here that says, you know, people, you know, they have 100% of the data, but for a speed of a decision, they use 70% of it. Like 70% is good enough for me. I know I got enough information to make this decision, and they sort of ignore the last 30%. So it's a matter of having the right data at good quality at the right time. So let's talk about the volume of data, specific to ergonomics, of course. So in these research articles that we've been sharing, we've scoured them, and what we found is that there just is not a large data set that really drives ergonomics research. So here's some examples. So recent large research projects. In 2015, there was one done on hands, wrists, and carpal tunnel syndrome across 54 locations, and there was 3,010 assessments that they reviewed. The second one we saw from 2014, 10 locations and 516 assessments that looked at upper extremity, and in particular elbow injuries.
And I think it's important to point out here that doesn't mean that these research projects aren't statistically significant. It's just the conclusions are good. It's just that there's just not that much out there, and I think that's the key takeaway here. Yep,
good point, Jenny. And then the last one on low back pain. So the volume of data is important. So how we look at it is that you can use this data to help manage your process. So this first bullet tells you about how confident you should be in gathering your data across your organization. So with these arrows, I'm going to work right to left. So your enterprise data, where you have all your data roll up into an enterprise to understand, for example, what % of your jobs are at high risk. That data point will help the corporation make some decisions. But what does that mean to the region? Right, a geographical region. Does that mean North America is driving more injuries? Is it Asia? Is it Europe? Right? Division or business unit. Is a type of product that you're building that's causing the majority of your injuries? Maybe it's just one location that has leadership issues, and for no particular reason they have high injuries. You can run that data. And lastly, you can get it down to department. So understanding which department within that location is driving those injury costs. So you can see how just the source of this data and rolling it up into large data can help you understand on a macro level, but then understand on a micro level. So if you look at the first sample data, this is from one of our clients, one of our larger clients. You can see that they have almost 5,000 assessments with 1,800 users and 350 global locations with 14,000 logins and 2,700 improvements. So that's a lot of data in comparison to what we just showed you on the previous slide. But if we, at last count, this is the big data in across all of our instances. So there's 117,000 assessments, 39,000 users, 3,700 locations, 160 plus clients, and 47,000 improvements. So that's a lot of information that can, tell a lot of different stories. Okay, so here's one. We see this all the time. So understanding the volume that comes in. So what about seasonality? Just the seasonality of the type of activity you see. So we drive leading metrics within our client base. And one of the leading metrics is the number of assessments that are completed. So Q1, the beginning of the year, they got lots of time, so they're not really in a hurry to get their assessments completed. What we find in Q2 is, they say, oh geez, Q1's over, I guess I better get caught up, and then vacations come, right? So summertime we see a lull, and then, the holy crap moment towards the end of the year, Q4, we have to hit our goals. So understanding this volume and seasonality and seeing this in real time is important because you can now manage around it.
And I think that's usually, we can feel that here at Human Tech just organically, I guess, that's when our phones start ringing off the hook. You can see Q2 and Q4 and they're going, oh my gosh, we just don't have the time resources to do this. Can you please come help us? And so, but now we have the data to back up what we've known in the past.
Yep, we see it all the time. So at the end of each of these, V's, I'm going to sort of give you some questions to think about. So first one is, are you gathering enough data to make meaningful decisions? So are you gathering across all locations, not just one? Are you looking at industries and your peers and beyond? Okay, are you gathering consistent data across large groups? From our perspective, you need reliable assessment tools and repeatable data collection methodologies to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. So we find this all the time. So we have let's say we have an organization that has 10 locations, and the corporate person will say, yeah, we have the sites tell us, what their issues are, and they can choose their risk assessments and thresholds. Could you imagine an IH group, having your corporate people saying, hey, you guys should define what your thresholds are, right? That's just not right, right? So having a consistent data set to be able to audit to is really important. So are your volumes of data readily accessible, right? So, ergonomics for a long time was paper and pencil, and we've really gotten away from that with the technologies with cloud-based systems.
And thank goodness, because I can't tell you the number of clients that I have that have, I lost that assessment because so-and-so accidentally recycled it, and
or your spreadsheet doesn't work because you don't have the updated version of Excel.
Right.
Okay, we won't, doesn't need to be a therapy session.
Right.
Okay, so the variety of data. Okay, so what type of data are you collecting? So in terms of ergonomics, there is endless type of data points that you can draw. So injuries and incidents, obviously. What workstations are driving that? The body parts, what are the risk factors? Exposure, quality data. So there really can be paralysis by analysis in this sense. So you have to select the data that matters. So if we look at what those bullets are, here they are. So the first thing you should be looking at is training. So the organization should have various levels from awareness training to subject matter experts to advanced engineering training. The definition of MSD risk factors. So understanding from a proactive perspective where those risk factors lie in your organization, quantify and prioritization. Direct causes, so doing a really good root cause analysis to get close to what is defining these risks, obviously gets you a little bit closer to what the improvements are. Because we are, we're philosophically trying to democratize ergonomics and get everybody involved, it's certainly important to get the feedback from the experts. Okay, so if you build your system properly, you're going to ask your shop floor employees for help. You're going to convey that message to the subject matter experts to quantify and prioritize and deliver the solutions back to the employees. If you don't have that loop, you're going to create frustration, and we've seen it many times where employees get trained on what to look for in terms of ergonomics. They're told to find problems, so they do, but nothing ever gets done, and that really is where the frustration comes in. But if you build the system properly, you'll be able to provide solutions to the employees and ultimately land in risk reduction. And if you have the right tools, you'll be able to quantify that risk reduction. And lastly is somehow calculating your return on your investment. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways, and I see there's a question that's already come in about return on investment, and we'll talk about that at the end. But return on investment is extremely important, and there's different ways that you can calculate that. What you'll see here is, or what you don't see here, is that we're not even talking about injuries. We're really talking about the leading metrics and the activities that will lead to a reduction in injuries. Okay, so this is a sort of a sample data set, if you will, in terms of the type of the variety of data that you can track. So this first graph, job assessment risk overview. This tells you what % of jobs are at high, medium, low risk, and which jobs have not been assessed yet. You know, if you look at this data point and just ask the rhetorical question, how can this data help you plan? You know, what we tell our clients all the time is, you know, make a plan so that you can identify your high risk jobs and work towards mitigating those high risk, getting them down to low or medium, and then working the punch list from there. So you imagine having this data point saying 8% of your jobs are at high risk, and we're going to plan over the next 5 years to bring that risk down.
And I think this is a really important point that, again, if you show something like this to leadership, they don't necessarily, they know inherently that red is bad and green is good, and they want to do everything that they can to get that graph to be all green. So I think that's, again, it's very good to be able to track that visually.
Yep, and it's activity-based, right? So we've identified and we've completed the assessments. Now we understand what our current status is, and we can put a plan to achieve the goals that we've set out. One in the middle here is our improvement plan summary. This is one that, you know, categorizes where the improvements that have been identified lie. So you can see top down, you'll see completed, waiting for decision, in progress. To me, you got, you know, 16.8% of your improvements that have been completed. Celebrate those, right? So the first thing that I would pull from this is that you've done some good things. Celebrate those improvements and show them across the organization. The next one, though, not so positive. So if 74% of your improvements are waiting for decision, that means your ergonomics team has done their job by doing the assessments, have come up with the solutions, and now it's management's time to step in and say, we support this, we're going to do what it takes to get these implemented. Obviously, there's going to have to be some justification in situations where, you know, you need to spend money, but Jenny and I will show you here towards the end that dollar value is much less than you think. So the last one is the direct cause summary. So root causes. You know, if you look at this categorization, you'll see that in this case you have process flow, equipment tool design, and workstation layout as representing, you know, 75% of your improvements. Those are easy fixes sometimes. Most of the time you can find a low-cost alternative, but it's not like it's a product design. So if you have product design issues, we all know how difficult that is to change, or even dunnage or packaging. Those cause issues, I get it, but they're very difficult to change. When you have a profile like this that shows you 75% are relatively easy to change, that is a good thing, and you can manage towards that. So with regards to variety, some questions you should be asking. So are you gathering enough kinds of data to understand the issues? So what are the activity metrics? You're looking at leading indicators that ultimately affect those lagging indicators. Number of assessments completed, number of improvements implemented, ultimately result in a reduction in injury. So what data is important, right? So I think you've caught on. So we've talked a lot about the important data points, but who governs this? So who's going to oversee it? Who's going to track it? Who's going to make sure that you know, you're auditing towards success? Okay. And then lastly, we did hit on this a little bit too. So are people collecting the data consistently? So do you have a reliable set of tools, methods, and process to create quality comparisons or an audit? Okay, so velocity of data, how quickly this data comes to you. So you must be able to access and analyze this data as quickly as possible. Without a doubt, we as a society demand that information is there when I need it. And without a doubt, cloud-based options are best. Anytime that you can click through to get to the information that you want to, and there's some human factors that go into that as well. You know, what we typically say is you should be able to get to where you need to within 2 clicks. So that's extremely important. And then anytime that you can visually represent this activity and this data through dashboards and reports, that's obviously extremely important. There's nothing like going into your big meeting, monthly meeting, and have to set aside 2 hours beforehand to create graphs. So when this data comes quickly, it allows you to take appropriate action more quickly. So this is a great example we run into all the time. So you have your ergonomics team in a facility that are doing wall-to-wall assessments. Say there's 250 total jobs in this plant, and they're given 1 week per month to do assessments. So after the first week, they find that 8 of the 25 jobs are identified as high risk. You know, this generally works better in a conference setting when I can ask this question and get responses, but what do you do? Think about that. You have high-risk jobs. Do you keep plugging with your assessments, or do you stop and fix it? To me, I would say absolutely. You need to stop because you found a problem to start fixing it. Jenny, have you run into situations like this?
Absolutely, and I think it's one of those things where we always hear about the stories of the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This allows you to, again, focus and take those, again, appropriate actions in the right direction, not just necessarily the employee who is very passionate about getting their fix implemented, even though the risk may not be there.
Ultimately, best case scenario is you have a team that are doing assessments that can continue to do the assessments, and you have a team that's responsible for improvements so that they can take this data set and work on improvements concurrently as the other group is plugging along through their assessments. So velocity of data, I mean, we have a very strong IT group, and they speak in languages that generally Jenny and I don't quite understand to the fullest, and I'm going to do my best to explain this, but what we're finding is that the IT infrastructure really, truly does matter, and I don't have the exact data point here, but Amazon put out a data point that said, you know, if somebody clicks on a product and you have to wait a certain amount of time for that product to load, they lose hundreds and millions of business because we are impatient as a people these days. So the speed and response is extremely important. It obviously has to be stable. So if you're about to go into your meeting and your website crashes, then obviously that's not a good thing. And then security and compliance with privacy laws. So you do online banking, you assume that everything is secure. If you have, product that is proprietary, which, 99% of you on the call do, you don't want to put pictures and videos somewhere where somebody can hack into it and see what you're doing. And then obviously there's privacy laws now that have to be adhered to as well. So things to consider when you're thinking about the velocity of the data. So last is the veracity. So what's the quality of this data going in? For years, and still today, ergonomics is observation-based. So we observe workstations and we complete our assessments. So we have to make sure that data is true and it's trusted. So you can see the bullet points here where the data quality can be influenced one way or another. So we have to be definitely concerned with this. A couple of different ways, and Jenny, jump in here if you have examples as well, that we make sure that our client's data is accurate. In situations where there is a union environment, a lot of times you'll have a union and management person together doing the assessment. Not necessarily that there isn't trust there, but it just allows for a smoother transition when we're talking about assessments.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I would add is, sometimes you have sites where they have an ergonomics team where they can sit down and discuss it and really kind of come to consensus when they're looking at these measures or doing these assessments. But then there's other cases where you have a single person that's tasked with doing all these assessments and they go, well, I completed this and I hope it's correct, but I really am not sure, and they're not confident in their own data. So I think that it's, again, we see that lots of variation depending on client situations.
Yep, and the overarching theme to this slide is garbage in, garbage out, right? So you have to make sure that the quality of the assessments that you're completing, the improvements that you're putting in, the return on investment calculations are accurate. and that is of utmost importance. So the questions that go along with the veracity of data, are your employees trained and skilled in data collection? Are you confident that they have the superior skills to do what they need to do? What measures do you have in place to ensure accuracy? And Jenny, I kind of walked you through a couple of different examples. And then lastly, is your data up to date? So do you have the system to flag where there's been a move or an improvement to a workstation or a change, and making sure that that assessment is completed? So when we take a look at those 4 V's, which are industry standards, and if you search on it, you'll find a lot of articles on the 4 V's. What we hopefully were able to establish through this is that these 4 V's help to unlock the 5th V. So if you look at the 4 V's now of big data that paints a picture, so the subliminal message here, we've been going step by step here, is hopefully you saw various pictures of cans of paint. There's a reason for that. So if you look at the volume that you need when you are painting something, you certainly have to have the right amount of paint. You should also have variety, right? So you should have different colors to add to the quality of the painting. And then velocity. So are you painting this with a brush? Are you using a roller? Are you using a sprayer? Right? You should know that. And then lastly is the quality of the paint, right? So you can buy the cheap stuff or you can buy the good stuff. Ultimately, what the paint is going to go into is using the paint to create value and paint a picture. Okay, so this is sort of the backdrop of the presentation and understanding how the 4 V's lead to the 5th V, which is value. So if you take a look at the value of big data and the Picasso that can be painted as a result of having good and appropriate data, it provides you with the scope and the scale of the issues. It helps you understand where the problems are, prioritize them, quantify them. It also helps you to draw conclusions, right? So based on an assessment, we need to make this change. We will see a risk reduction of a certain percentage, and then you're able to make and justify that solution. And then lastly, it helps you to enable better decision making.
And I would underline that last bullet point is, again, these bits of data do not make the decision for you, but they help you make an informed decision to make sure that you're making the correct decision based on your company situation, resources, et cetera.
So really what we've hoped to establish here through this first portion of the presentation is, lay out what the value that ergonomics can bring to an organization through Jenny's series of slides out of the get-go. We also wanted to show you what the 4 V's of big data can bring that ultimately show that, like it says here, the ability to achieve greater value through these insights and analytics can absolutely bring value to your organization. Now, ultimately, you're going to get to the point where you want us to stop talking philosophically and get to the numbers, which we have for you, and we've got a series of subsets of information that we wanted to share. So these are big data, right? So pulled from our data set and industry specific. So automotive industry. So we've done some benchmarking across our automotive clients, and you can see on the left-hand side you have the segment overview, give you an idea of the quantity of information. So there's 1,700 locations, over 30,000 jobs assessed, and the last bullet is extremely important. You'll see that their average reduction in risk at follow-up is 56.8%. So in other words, they're doing an initial assessment, finding a certain risk level, changing the workstation, and that when they do a follow-up analysis, they're seeing 56.8% risk reduction. That's amazing. So what type of activities lead to that? You'll see in the middle here we have improvement overview. So in the system, there's over 6,000 improvements that are being tracked. 4,231 of those are high impact, low cost. So improvements as a broad stroke that are less than $2,000, $2,000. And you can see the median cost per improvement and the median number of days that it takes to make these changes. So what we're finding is that our clients are uncovering low-hanging fruit and fixing them. And you can see the direct causes on the right-hand side. So you can see that equipment, tool design, workstation layout, and they found that product design was their number 3. And then you can see the type of improvements that fall into the hierarchy of controls. So equipment changes, work instruction, and coaching. Okay, so these are the numbers for the automotive industry. little bit more difficult industry in terms of changing the workplace would be pharmaceutical. So these are the numbers for pharmaceutical. You can see, again, there is a lot of data. So the volume of data is there, 1,000 locations, 4,797 jobs assessed. Again, over 50% risk reduction when they change the workplace. Much fewer improvements, again, because the pharmaceutical industry is difficult to make changes. And you can see there's 1,038 improvements included, but even still, of those, 1,366 are still high impact, low cost, with their improvements less than $400, but because of the nature of validation within the pharmaceutical industry, it takes much longer to make those changes.
And to be honest, I was actually really surprised by this information, because anytime you're dealing with pharmaceutical, you instantly think of stainless steel, and anytime you're thinking about stainless steel, you think about dollar signs. So the fact that they were able to either use existing equipment or just modify or move maybe existing equipment, and that it didn't result in the high price tag that we typically associate with pharma, I think that was very surprising and insightful to me.
Right, and thanks, Jenny. And then lastly, you can see the information there on the right-hand side, similar to the previous slide. So the last industry that we have plenty of data in is food and beverage. So you can see, again, there's 1,704 locations, almost 9,000 assessments completed. Their average risk reduction is the highest of the group, 56.8%. Again, all three have shown risk reduction over 50%, which is amazing. 5,100 total improvements completed. Of those, 3,400 are high impact, low cost, and the median cost of those is 700. Now, because of food and beverage having opportunities, I mean, these improvements are being made quickly. So, next day delivery. You can see the direct causes in the top right, and then the type of improvements. Again, without a doubt, we are changing the workplace around the employees, being able to show risk reduction. Without a doubt, I will tell you, this is my favorite data point that we pulled from big data, and I talk about this all the time. As a lifelong ergonomist, someone who's been doing this for 20 plus years, I used to walk into the room and people would say, oh boy, the ergo guy's here, it's going to cost us money, right, because he's going to make us change the workplace. And yes, that's what I'm going to do. But what we're finding again is that our clients are able to find the low-hanging fruit. For a long time we've said, you got to have the ergo eyes to be able to see the problems in the workplace, and that philosophy hasn't changed. You need to be able to see these to be able to drive these improvements, and 70% of the improvements of the 117,000 assessments that are in the system, 70% of them are defined as high impact, low cost. So we're teaching you to find the low-hanging fruit, and it's there.
And I think the important takeaway for this is, again, there's no such thing as too small of an improvement. So any improvement makes, again, as Jeff alluded to, makes us go in that correct direction, where, again, we can see, as we've shown, in previous slides, we have that impact. So even if it's something as simple as relocating a bin 6 inches closer to the employee, that does actually have an impact, even though we don't feel that it does. I hope this data helps really underline that fact.
Okay, so with that, we'd like to close with one simple slide here, telling you what our thoughts are to summarize everything. So we hope that you've been able to see how big data can really show the value of an ergonomics process, and hopefully through the research articles, you see that it's not just us telling you about this as a company, but there are research articles that are designed to show the improvements that can come as a whole organization when you have a really strong ergonomics process. Okay, so just quickly, these two bullets: to engage the employees, business leaders, you need to simply connect one-on-one with them to establish a foundation of trust and respect. So engage your employees, have them understand what you're doing. It's a win-win situation. And ultimately, when you meet their needs, there's going to be a positive morale, and there'll be a commitment to the organization like no other. So it is truly a win-win situation. The employee has a better job. They're safer when they go home, and the organization overall has better performance. So with that, we would like to open up questions. Ed, I think this is where you jump in and let us know if there's any questions from the crowd.
Sure thing, Jeff. Thanks for your presentation. We've got a couple of minutes for questions here. There's already a few waiting. The first one is, what is the best method to show return on investment for ergonomics improvements?
So I'll take this one, and I think, of course, the answer to a lot of these questions and any question is it depends. And the reason that I say that is it's going to depend on who you're speaking to and what language they speak. So, for example, as Jeff alluded to, if you have a case where, yes, it is a high-risk workstation, but you know that maybe they've got some quality issues at this workstation as well, you can really capture those quality issues and show a return on investment that way as opposed to, through productivity or something like that that may not resonate with them as much. And Jeff, I don't know if you would add anything to that.
Yeah, and just adding to that, there's really 4 elements that you can use. One is cost avoidance, again, so this is a little bit softer, but it's been used, where you say, our average injury is, $8,000. If we have a high-risk job, chances are somebody's going to get hurt. So if I take that job from a high risk to a medium, really that's an $8,000 direct cost savings because I really just saved an injury from happening, okay? More quantitatively, Jenny's right. So on a quality side of things, you can show quality improvements, productivity too. So those 3, of quality and productivity, if you can show by reducing a reach distance at a workstation or having to reduce somebody from bending over, there's time associated with that. If you can capture that time, you can certainly show return on investment. And lastly is turnover, right? So if you know the cost of recruiting somebody, your HR department probably would have that. That's a hard data point that you can put into your ROI calculation. Now we've tried to get clients to do that. Those are hard data points to attract and find, but those are the 4 data points that I would suggest you use to really show a return on investment.
Thanks, Jeff and Jenny. Here's a question. You had a slide fairly early on in your presentation that showed some data from an article, and I believe it was Applied Ergonomics by Tampa and others. Marge asked, do you know how they measured the cost benefit in that study?
Oh, geez, not directly. And anytime I'm assuming when you see cost benefit, it's going to be the cost of the rollout of the process. So that may be consulting fees. It may be a combination of employees' time, so the amount of cost that's going to go into running the organization, and the save, right? My guess is generally, especially at that time when that article was produced, it is probably a comparison of what their injury costs were and then what they were in the present. So the amount that they put into the process in correlation to reduction in injury costs. Sound right? Jenny's giving me the thumbs up.
Yep.
Great. Also had a question about large office settings in particular. Do you have data you can show for that, and what are the cost benefits for large office settings?
Office settings definitely a little bit different. Really, it's injury, right? I'll tell you that the best story that I came across with office. Again, they had a rating scale where they had high, medium, and low, and they actually defined moving somebody from high to medium or low as a save. So being a baseball guy, I was interested in this, right, because it's a baseball statistic. But they saved an injury when somebody put up their hand and said, I'm experiencing discomfort, right? So if somebody said that they're experiencing discomfort, there was an assumption that person was going to be hurt at some point. So when they used their process, it was a very specific process where they assessed the workstation and then did a series of follow-ups after 8 weeks. And after 8 weeks, if the person gave them the thumbs up and said, I'm more comfortable, the discomfort is gone, they considered that a save. And there, like I said before, I throw out a number of, an average injury of $8,000, they considered that a save. So that was probably the most unique and effective way that I saw an office ergonomics process be shown return on investment.
Great, thanks. I know we're right at the top of the hour, but I do want to squeeze one more in here. You had a chart towards the end of your presentation that was a matrix of high and low impact and high and low cost. And Nicole is asking, how do you define high impact versus low impact and high cost versus low cost?
Yeah, we generally, in terms of high impact and low impact, if it's going to have a drastic risk reduction, and we have a tool that actually would measure that, we would say, for example, with the particular tool we're discussing, it would go from maybe a score of a 4 to a 3. That would be considered high impact. If we're going from a 1 to a 0, it's less of an impact. And then in terms of the cost, high cost versus low cost, we consider high cost being something that is either, again, $2,000 to $3,000, but it's basically whatever the employer's capital threshold is, so anytime you have to get additional signatures, basically, or greater than 6 months to implement.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. My thanks to Jeff and Jenny for your presentation, to HumanTech for sponsoring today's webinar, and to all of our participants. Our next Synergist webinar is a week from today, May 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. The topic is chemical protective clothing, and you can register at aiha.webvent.tv. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. The recording will be available at aiha.webvent.tv. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with this link, and please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.